We have covered that in other presentations. But just in brief, eating an animal fat and protein diet significantly increases the risk of a person getting one or more of the major chronic diseases, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, etc. But as I said, that's not what we're looking at today. We're looking at the vegan diet and what is a lousy vegan diet and how not to have a lousy vegan diet. So what is a good vegan diet? What is a good one? Well, a good vegan diet is a whole food plant-based diet, okay? That means that you're not eating any meat, you're not eating any fish, you're not eating any fowl. That means chicken, no fish, no meat, no eggs, no dairy products, only plant foods. So that's a plant-based diet or a vegan diet. Now, why would we say whole food? Well, because that actually also excludes certain things. These things usually come from plants. Alcoholic beverages usually are from plants. Either they're grain or some kind of fruit-based or whatever. So it's plant-based, but it's certainly not a whole food situation. This is obviously candy, and much of candy is plant-based. There may be some dairy in some of it. And so this is not a very good example of a whole food plant-based diet because there's a lot of sugar, there's a lot of refined food, a lot of refined ingredients in this example here. These are also vegan, but they're certainly not in a whole food category. They are not whole food they're plant-based. Yes, they may be plant-based. Much of it is based upon potatoes, refined grains, sugar, peanut butter, those kind of things, but not really whole foods as such. So let's look at what is a whole food plant-based diet. So we're going to look at first what is a good vegan diet, and then we'll look a little bit at some possible examples of a lousy vegan diet. A good vegan plate. So we've got our circle here to represent a plate. Plate that we had to have for lunch, we have here at church, whatever. So we have a plate, and this plate is divided into sections. It's divided into half and then half again. So basically into quarters. Half of that plate, as you'll see, has to do with vegetables. Raw vegetables and cooked vegetables are actually half of that plate. The other half is composed of beans, nuts, seeds, and legumes. And the other part of that, which is a quarter, are grains, starchy roots, and vegetables. So this is a good representation of a good vegan plate. Half vegetables, a quarter as the beans, nuts, seeds, and legumes, and a quarter as grains, starchy vegetables, and root vegetables. So let's look at each section a little bit closer. So raw vegetables. So the half of the half should be, at least that should be raw vegetables on a plate. We can have the whole half as raw vegetables if we want, but at least a portion of our vegetables should be raw. So in other words, all of our vegetables are not cooked. Now for some people that have certain health issues, that might adjust a little bit because of a problem of chewing the raw vegetables or digesting it because of certain irritable bowel problems. But for the majority of us, we should seek to have about half of our plate as vegetables and a good portion of that as raw vegetables. What are we talking about as far as raw vegetables? Especially the raw leafy greens. Our lettuces, our spinach, our watercress, our arugula, our romaine, our green and red leafies, all of those. And so on our salads, yes, we can have some salad dressing that makes it a nice flavor. And for that, we're typically looking at things like olive oils or flaxseed oils or chia seed oils or hemp seed oils, some of the oils that are high in those omega-3s, or as in the case of the olive oil, the monounsaturated. Omega-3 oils should not be heated, like the flaxseed oils, chia seed oils. It's better that they're not heated. So that's why they're good to be used in the salad dressing. And while I'm on the raw, I'm just going to mention that as far as 100% raw diet, 100% raw diet is good for certain therapeutic purposes, but typically on a long-term maintenance program, you're not going to do so well on 100% raw for an indefinite period of time. 100% raw is a great therapeutic diet for certain health problems that you'll use for a certain period of time. Why do I say that 100% raw is not necessarily good for an ongoing indefinite maintenance program? Well, for one, it's usually harder to stay warm in the winter on 100% raw. Having some warm cooked food is very helpful in keeping warm in the winter. Also, there are some nutrients that are more easily absorbed when the food is cooked. So having that variety of raw and cooked covers both spectrums. Also, cooking softens some of the plant cells, so it's easier to chew, it's easier to digest, etc. So our bodies are better able to take advantage of that. Also interesting, cooking is mentioned in the Bible. Several examples are when Abraham made cakes for the angels that were visiting him. They were baked. Jacob had lentils that Esau wanted. And even the manna, which was considered angel food, or which would be considered perfect food, the children of Israel used it in a variety of ways. And one of the ways that they used manna was to grind it and make cakes out of it. So and they would bake it. The cakes meaning that they baked the cakes also. They put it in pans and baked it. So being perfect food, it is interesting that the Bible states they cooked it, they baked it. So those are some of the reasons why 100% raw for an indefinite period is probably not something that most of us will do too well on. But that is not to say that we should not have a significant representation of raw in our daily plates. And at least a quarter, and the key word here is at least a quarter of our plate should be the raw vegetables. We also have cooked greens that we can eat. Usually those cooked greens will be things like beet, Swiss chard, beet greens, mustard greens, collard greens. Most of the time we don't see those kind of greens in a raw format unless maybe you're getting some really young ones, young leaves. But otherwise those leaves are harder and they're firmer, and usually we will cook those. So having some cooked vegetables is good. And then of course we have vegetables that are able to go either direction. Such as, there's a whole bunches of them. This one just shows beets, but there are many vegetables that we can use both cooked and raw. Beets obviously being one, peppers, bell peppers, red, green, yellow. Bell peppers, they can be either cooked or used raw. Onions, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, and many more things that we can use as both cooked and raw. And having that variety again is good because sometimes cooking helps to make some nutrients more available than others, but having it raw enables the enzymes to still be intact that is presented in the raw food. And you need both, so variety between those two. It's good for us to eat as organic as much as possible, even with the fruits and vegetables, or if we're growing our own, that means that we know whether or not they've been sprayed, as well as whether or not they have been genetically modified. Most fruits and vegetables are not genetically modified, but they have had different chemicals sprayed on them. Statistically, the fruits that have the most chemicals are peaches, strawberries, and apples. Apples these days, it's very easy to get them as organic. As far as peaches, you know, Georgia's is labeled the peach state, so yes, we can get peaches from Georgia, North Georgia. I don't know if any of you that was coming back from camp out noticed the orchards that we're passing by, and they right now have peaches in season. So it would seem to make sense to use locally grown as much as possible as well. Strawberries also can get local. There are different pick patches that can be where you can go and pick your own patch, your own strawberries, but it's just we're just on the tail end of strawberry picking for this year. It kind of stopped, I think, suddenly a bit this year. As far as vegetables, spinach, celery, and potatoes have some of the most chemicals. Also, green peppers or the peppers, getting your peppers organic is great. And statistically, it has been shown that organic vegetables have more nutrients in them than the non-organic. So that's another reason to try to seek to do that as well. I also want to mention, as far as the acid-alkaline concept here, and then we're looking at a plate instead of an acid-alkaline concept. How many of you have heard the acid-alkaline concept of choosing your food? Some of us have, some of us have not. What the acid-alkaline concept is that you eat a majority of foods that leave an alkaline residue in the body compared to acid. And usually the target is somewhere around 80% alkaline, 20% acid. Now that is based upon, and how many of you have ever done any testing on your food to find out if it's alkaline and acid? Nobody. We don't know how, we don't have the equipment to test whether or not our food has an alkaline ash or an acid ash. So we go by lists. And you know what? Unfortunately, the lists can be contradictory. In one list, you can have some things on an alkaline side and some on the acid side. It particularly has to do when you get into some of the grains and the legumes. Most of the time, people will agree that fruits and vegetables, for the most part, but there's even some disagreement there, that they're alkaline. What really is behind this alkaline acid thing? What it really seems to be, and there's generally not a terribly good explanation of it other than lists, and that is certain components of the food result in an alkaline residue in the body. Certain components of a food result in an acid component residue in the body. And just because lemons taste acidy doesn't mean that they're going to have an acid residue. Actually, they have an alkaline residue. It has to do with the proportion of alkaline nutrients, especially the minerals. There are 4, 5, 6 different minerals that are major minerals that result in an alkaline residue. Some of those major minerals are magnesium, calcium, sodium, and potassium, also sodium bicarbonate, and perhaps phosphorus. So, if a food has a lot of minerals in it, it's probably going to have an alkaline residue. Now, what causes it to have an acid residue? Certain amino acids result in having an acid residue. So it ends up being this proportion between how much minerals the food has compared to what of the acid resulting proteins it has in the food results in this, whether it's alkaline or acid. And so obviously we're going to start to realize there's a continuum here. It's not just, oh, it's alkaline and oh, it's acid. There are some foods like whole grains are virtually almost neutral. But white flour is definitely not neutral. That's acid. And why acid resulting? And why? We can understand easily. When they refine foods, what do they take out? What are some of the components they take out? The vitamins and minerals, and yes, the fiber too. So if you're taking out the minerals, you're obviously reducing the components of the food that's going to result in an alkaline ash or an alkaline residue. So the point is there's a continuum of how acid or alkaline that residue is going to be. It's not just a cut and dried. So I find that the acid-alkaline concept in practicality ends up being a little confusing, especially when you have the list of foods that don't even necessarily agree all the time on what is alkaline and what is acid. I like the food proportion because, okay, most of us know what a vegetable is, I think. Most of us know what a vegetable is, yes. Most of us know what a grain is, yes. Most of us know what a potato is, yes. Most of us know what a nut is. And so it's very easy then to get a visual as to what our plate looks like as opposed to going through a list and trying to figure that out and having the list unless you have it memorized. So I appreciate the proportions better than the acid-alkaline concept because it automatically pretty much gives us that proportion, because if half of our plate is vegetables, which are typically almost all entirely resulting in an alkaline ash, that's a big proportion right there. And if all the grains and the legumes that we're eating are whole food and unrefined, that means that even if it has an acid residue, it's going to be small because of the minerals that are still left intact in the food. So this to me is a very practical illustration of deciding what our plate should look like. So moving on, the grains. The grains are actually probably the most troublesome category. And as you can see, it's not a very big category, but for a lot of us, it's not only big, but this is where processing of food has taken its biggest toll, is on the grains. Because when you think about it, the refined foods are pretty much to a great extent in the grains category. White flour, white rice, pastries, sugar, all of this is in the grain or carbohydrate category. Potato chips, all of this is in the grain, starchy root, vegetable category. So this category is, like I said, probably our most troublesome as far as a whole food plant-based diet because it has suffered such degradation due to processing, to food processing. When food is processed, it's refined. Again, it's removing most of the vitamins and minerals, and it's removing the fiber, a lot of the fiber. And then many times, what do they add back into it? They add back into it sugars, they add back into it excess fat and maybe excess salt as well, artificial flavorings, colorings, all this kind of stuff. And a lot of times, again, it is in those dishes that are in the grain and starchy category. So this is in a lousy vegan diet plate, as we're going to see, that quarter is going to probably require our biggest attention in making adjustments and trying to get it into its proper perspective and to make sure it is whole food as opposed to refined. So in this category, there's, as far as grains, there's lots of possibilities, and typically we are fixated on just a couple categories. For some cultures, wheat is a big deal. For some cultures, rice is a big deal. But there's a lot of other possibilities. Of course, corn, as far as the corn that is ground for corn chips. There's spelt, there's kamut, there's quinoa, there's millet, there's teff, there's a bunch of whole grains that we typically don't use, but they themselves can add additional variety to our choices. Also in this category is pasta. You can choose whole grain, whole wheat pasta. Semolina pasta is probably one of the most popular forms of pasta, and it is not as good as whole wheat pasta, but it's better than white flour bread. Semolina tends to not be quite as processed, still has a little bit more of the fiber, a little bit more of the B vitamins, and a little bit more of the protein. It doesn't affect your blood sugar quite as much as white flour bread is or does. So it's a little bit better, but even better yet is whole grain pasta. Potatoes fit in this category, as I said. Potatoes, yams, sweet corn, cassava. If you're from Africa, these kinds of things, they are all in the starchy category. Simple carbohydrates can fit into this category as well, because sugar is a form of starch, but it's broken down even more. So what we have to watch out for is that this portion of the plate doesn't expand too much. Right now in this diagram, it shows it as about a quarter of our plate. If you are healthy and you're eating a whole foods category, a food in this category, in other words, brown rice instead of white rice, whole wheat bread instead of white bread, unrefined grains, these kind of things, we can allow it to expand a little bit more, because again, it's going to have, the unrefined is going to have the minerals, the vitamins, the fiber. So we have a little latitude if it's a whole food plant-based diet. But if you are sick, you probably do need those extra vegetables. And you'll notice what happens once we start elongating this section is what starts to suffer. We eat a little bit less vegetables, we eat a little less beans, and as you're going to see in a minute, beans are really important as well. So when you expand one section, that means another section is going to diminish. And we have to realize it's a balance. It's not just an expansion of one without the diminishing of the other. Beans and legumes and seeds. There's a whole lot in this category. Kidney beans, brown beans, black beans, white beans, pinto beans, pink beans, soybeans, and lentils and all of its products. So there's a lot of different things. And one thing about beans are one of our highest sources of fiber. Now, we know the only place that we get fiber is where? Plant foods, right? That's the only place you get fiber. You do not get fiber from any animal products. You do not get any fiber from meat. You do not get any fiber from fish. You do not get any fiber from chicken. You do not get any fiber from milk or cheese or eggs. The only place you get fiber is from plant foods, because by definition, fiber is indigestible or partially indigestible plant foods or plant cell walls. Well, if you're not a plant, you can't be a plant. So it becomes a circular reasoning. So plants are the only place you get fiber. And beans are one of our biggest sources of fiber. one of the most dense sources of fiber. Yes, we get a good amount of fiber in brown rice and whole wheat bread. And I want to interject here just as a reminder. When you go to the store to buy bread, don't look for wheat bread, because 99% of the time, if it just says wheat, that's white. That's refined wheat bread. It has to say 100% whole wheat or 100% whole grain, and then you still can look at the ingredients to see if it really is completely unrefined foods. If you can make your own bread, it is so much better. And with the bread bakers now, all you have to do is throw everything in the pot, set it for the time, turn it on, and you can turn it on so it works at the nighttime, so it's done in the morning. You don't have to sit and watch over it, or you turn it on in the morning and you can come back to it at night and take it out, and it makes it super, super easy. All of us could have homemade bread, and when you have homemade bread, then you can control that you really are getting 100% whole wheat, organic, and that's 100 organic whole wheat, and you control all the ingredients as well. And homemade bread tastes so much better than the store does. So much better, and it's so much better for you. So whole grains are good sources of fiber as well, the unrefined. Fruits, certain fruits are even have more fiber than other fruits, like apples and pears are pretty high in fiber compared to some of the other fruits. Things like watermelon obviously doesn't have a lot of fiber because it's a lot of juice. So there's some fruits have more fiber than others. Our grains are going to have a good amount of fiber, and especially even the cooked greens are going to have a good amount of fiber because, well, one of the reasons we're cooking them is because otherwise they're a little bit tough to eat if we didn't cook them. But beans are a really good source. And why am I saying so much about fiber? The natural healing world has kind of come full circle. Some 30 years ago, fiber was kind of the thing. And now it's come back to being a major discussion among different natural healing people. And it's good, because what it is showing is the importance of fiber in our health, and the importance of fiber in making sure our guts are healthy. Our guts are actually very tied to the other major systems of our body, like our brain. Some people even characterize it that there's a superhighway between your gut and your brain. What affects your brain affects your gut, and what affects your gut affects your brain. So, and that just proves that when you are stressed out, some of you have indigestion problems. You don't eat, or you eat too much, or whatever. You're just off kilter in your digestion when you're stressed out. Or if you're having stomach issues, you end up being irritable. So yes, the digestion and the brain have a lot of talking that's going on between the two of them. Also, your immune system has is affected in a major way by your gut as well. And one of the big things that affects your gut health is fiber. Fiber. And so if we're eating a diet that has a lot of packaged foods in it, refined foods, we're losing out on fiber. We need to start looking not just at the ingredients, but also how much fiber is in that food. We should have anywhere between 25 and 35 grams of fiber in our diet every day. That means every meal needs to have at least 10 grams. There are some natural healers that are saying we should have 40 grams of fiber in our diet every day. And you might say, oh, I'll just take a fiber supplement. Not so easy. That will do in a pinch. That will help with constipation and things like that. But what they're finding is that each of these different foods, the different kinds of beans, the different grains, the different fruits, the different vegetables, all have slightly different variations of fiber. So the fiber in the strawberries are different than the fiber in the blueberries, which is different than the fiber in the arugula lettuce, which is different than the fiber in your romaine lettuce, which is different than the fiber in squash and pumpkins. It's different than the fiber in the beans, and the beans each have different nuances of fiber. And each of those different little variations of fiber feed different friendly bacteria in your gut. If you go and get a probiotic, they might have what? 1 to 4 different strains of friendly bacteria that you're seeding your gut with, right? No, that's not how many strains of friendly bacteria in your gut you have. You actually have hundreds or even thousands of different strains of bacteria in your gut. It's even been said you have more bacteria in your gut than you have in cells. But whether or not it is to that extent, it just shows to what extent we have a symbiotic relationship with the friendly bacteria in our gut, and we have to feed them. Why do we have to feed them? Because they create a fermentation process for fiber. And the end result of this fermentation that happens with the fiber results in energy. Sources of energy, both for your body as well as for the cells lining your intestinal tract, your gut. Actually, the energy from the fermentation of the fiber by the friendly bacteria is a primary or the primary source of energy lining the cells of your gut. And if you don't have a healthy gut lining, what do we end up having? Have you ever heard of leaky gut? What that basically means is that the cells in your gut, the junctions, the joinment between them starts to get lazy and starts to separate a little bit. And partially undigested pieces of food can pass from your gut into your bloodstream. Is that supposed to happen? Oh no. Your bloodstream is expecting fully digested foods. In other words, the proteins are completely broken down to amino acids, not partially broken down protein. And so when your bloodstream sees uncompletely digested protein entering the bloodstream, it says, oh, this is a pathogen. This is something that's going to be dangerous. And what does the body do when it sees something dangerous come along? It kicks in your immune system. It kicks in inflammation. It revs up your immune system, which in itself takes a lot of energy. Your immune system takes a lot of energy. And so it makes you tired. It makes you allergic to various foods. You have chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation is the basis of a host of chronic illnesses. A host of chronic illnesses. If you have a chronic illness, probably chronic inflammation is in the mix somewhere. And if you have an unhealthy gut, that's part of the problem. And why would you have an unhealthy gut? Well, maybe you're not feeding your friendly bacteria sufficiently to make a healthy gut. How do we feed our friendly bacteria? By eating fiber, eating a variety of fiber, all the different varieties and all the different kinds of plant foods, because each of those varieties of fiber feed different little species of the friendly bacteria, and they all work together to provide the energy for the lining of your intestinal tract, as well as keep out the bad guys. Your gut is real estate. Somebody's going to inhabit it. And it's up to you whether it's the friendly guys or the unfriendly guys. If you're eating a diet of meat and dairy and eggs and processed foods, it's going to be the unfriendly guys that have taken up shot because you haven't been feeding the friendly guys. You got to take care of the friendly guys so they take up all of the real estate, so the bad guys don't have space to be there. So that's part of the big reason why fiber is so important, and why just taking fiber supplements, yeah, they're a band-aid, they help with constipation, but that should not be your source of fiber, because each of those different plant foods feed different friendly bacteria. Also with this protein, this section are the higher protein foods. Your beans are the ones that are higher in protein also. There are some grains that are higher in protein, like quinoa is pretty high in protein, but that's not typically a staple here in this country. And as we get older, we need to pay attention to this protein category. Because as we get older, our bodies naturally, our muscles start to naturally atrophy, start to get smaller. And so we do have to work a little harder to keep our muscle mass up, which means we need to exercise, do those resistance exercises. And I know you've heard all of us in the Health and Temperance Department talk about your exercise. The walking is good, but we also need to pay attention to our muscle mass. Get out the little weights, get out the resistant exercises, do the push-ups, do anything that's resistant to build your muscle mass. And to support that, you eat and make sure you have in your diet those foods that are higher in protein, like your beans and your legumes and even your nuts. Also, having these higher protein foods enable us to be satisfied from meal to meal. One example I like to give is like if you've ever eaten a meal of pancakes. We like pancakes. Say if you've just had pancakes with some fruit. Probably you're going to be hungry in about 2 to 3 hours. Why? Well, there's not a real lot of protein in strawberries and buckwheat. There'll be some, but probably not enough to really keep you feeling satisfied until that next meal. That's where one of the things that the higher protein foods do. Help us to feel satisfied for that stretch of time to the next meal. And then nuts also give us a little bit higher fat. That helps us to feel satisfied that we've had a fulfilling meal. And there's lots of nuts. There's cashews, almonds, ground nuts, peanuts, macadamia nuts, walnuts, pecans, and you can fill out a whole bunch of more nuts that we have access to. So again, nuts are one of the fattier foods, which is good, but we also have to know how to manage it. You can gain weight on nuts. Why? Fat has 9 calories per gram. Fat has 9 calories per gram. Protein and carbohydrate has 4. And when we eat more calories than our body needs, what does it do? Stores it for later. The body might like to do that, but you might not like that as you gain weight. And for those of you that did the composition and you realize, there's a little bit more fat there than I was really hoping. Your body is good at storing it. So the nuts are good, but keep in mind that if you are struggling with weight management, be moderate on your nuts, because fat has how many calories per gram? 9 versus 4 for protein and carbohydrates, which basically encompasses the rest of what we have just talked about. including the beans. The beans are going to be high in both protein and carbohydrate. They're typically not so high in fat. Beans are more higher in protein and carbohydrate, fiber included. So if you are endeavoring to manage your weight, be moderate on the nuts, be moderate on all your oil intake, all your fatty intake, because that will make a difference. Just the fact that fat is twice as many calories as is the other things. Reducing the amount of fat that you are intaking from any source, even if it's good fats. Good fats are still going to have 9 calories per gram. Even avocados, of the fatty portion, the fat component of avocados, still you're not going to get away from 9 grams per 9 calories per gram. Now, of course, things like avocados are better than refined foods, and olive oil is better than refined oils, and expeller pressed oils are going to be better, but still, once you get into fat and oils, it's twice as much calories as is the other. So we need some fat in our diet, we really do, but for those that are needing to maintain or manage their weight and they're having this difficulty, they need to keep the fat intake lower, like maybe 15 to no more than 20% of their caloric intake. Whereas people who are needing to put on some weight, they have a lot more latitude of using those nuts, those higher fatty foods, those olives, those avocados, those nuts, and some of the other things that have the higher fat, because they maybe have a high metabolism and they just need the extra calories to fuel that extra metabolism. It ends up being an individual choice, an individual matter as to what your body is like. Also in this category of beans, nuts, seeds, and legumes are, of course, the seeds: sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, squash seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, and more seeds. So yes, that fits in that category as well. Some higher fat foods and some higher fiber foods as well. But still a portion, a part of a healthy plant-based diet. Another one are things that we don't necessarily look to being so much as beans or nuts, and that's things like garbanzos or even black-eyed peas. They look a little different than our standard peas, but they fit into that category too. And for those of you who are hummus lovers, that's where this fits in. I personally find hummus is a very satisfying food, I think because of the protein content in it, and it just is very, very flavorful. So that gives us an idea of what a good vegan plate should look like, of whole foods, not refined foods, where the fiber has been largely refined out. Most of the vitamins and minerals have been refined out, and it is sitting in a package. Not to say that every single package that is a taboo, but once it's in a package, you pay more attention. Another way somebody else has put it is that be careful if you can't make that same thing in your own kitchen. You see, processing is actually on a continuum as well. If you go to your garden and pick a cherry tomato off of your tomato bush and you pop it in your mouth, that's probably about as least processed as you could possibly get. But then maybe you take that tomato and you go and maybe make some tomato sauce out of it. You cook it and put some seasonings with it, maybe some olive oil. That's actually a form of processing. You've done something to it that is not exactly in its original form. You've done something to it. not necessarily bad, but you have processed it in some way. So it's a continuum. And then you get a little further, maybe you've added some additional things. Maybe you've made it, what could I say? I don't know, blueberries. You've taken some blueberries off the bush, and you're going to cook them, and you've got a cup of blueberries, and you're going to put 3/4 of a cup of sugar with them to make a blueberry pie. For me, that's definitely another step in processing, because you're adding other things that are not that great for us. And they can do that in processing. And not only sugar, they can add excess salt, they can add colorings, they can add chemicals, and so forth. And then you start to get into things on the label that you're not even sure what they are. So when it starts getting into things on the label, what you don't even know what they are, and especially if it doesn't say organic already, maybe there's a better choice. Maybe there's a better choice for you. And like again, especially if it's not organic and it's not whole grain, and again, if it's things that you cannot pronounce the name, or you don't know what they are, you try to minimize that. So, a whole food, plant-based diet is what a good vegan diet is. Let's look at a lousy vegan plate. What's wrong with this? What's wrong with this picture here? How much has the grain and starchy root and vegetable category expanded to? Almost half. Which category typically is the most troublesome for being processed? That very same category. What is the likelihood a person that has expanded that category to that extent? Probably to some degree, or a great degree, that almost half being somewhat or to a large degree processed. Probably the likelihood starts to get bigger. And we start to see what else ends up suffering. What else suffers when we start expanding that category outside of its proper limits? Vegetables start to suffer. The beans and the legumes start to suffer. And they themselves impart important components in the dietary. So what in practicality would this look like? Let me give you some examples, and we can then look at maybe some ways of improving the not so good examples. A possible lousy vegan plate could be a plate of spaghetti with maybe a half a cup of tomato sauce with some vegetables, and a meatball and a small salad and garlic bread. So we've got spaghetti, a little bit of tomato sauce and a little bit of vegetables, a meatball, and a small salad and garlic bread. Does that mean a spaghetti meal is a bad meal? No, it doesn't mean it's a bad meal, but what do we need to do? We need to adjust some of its proportions. We need to, instead of having a pile of the spaghetti, have a smaller amount of spaghetti and a pile of the vegetables and the tomato sauce. So we're getting a lot of vegetables in that tomato sauce so that we're getting a good representation of those cooked vegetables. Yes, they're in the spaghetti sauce, so fine, they're in the spaghetti sauce, but they're cooked vegetables, and you're getting the vegetables, you're getting the cooked vegetables. And expanding the small salad to a little bit bigger salad. Try to get whole wheat bread. Most of the time when we're using garlic bread, it is white flour instead of whole wheat. So not making those pieces of garlic bread too big unless you're willing to eat a commensurate amount of the vegetables in the spaghetti sauce and your salad as well, so we still end up with a good proportion of the starches, not expanding much more outside of a third of your plate. We really don't want our starchy component of of our plate to really exceed about a third, as I showed on one of the previous slides. So changing the proportion, reducing the amount from the big pile of the spaghetti to smaller, increasing the vegetables, increasing the tomatoes, increasing the salad would be a good thing. Okay, another possible not so good would be rice with a couple tablespoons of mixed vegetables and a couple small pieces of tofu. Well, okay, what could be done to improve that? Increase the vegetables, have a smaller amount of rice and having a nice big stir fry instead of just a few little mixed vegetables mixed in. Have a stir fry with more tofu. Make sure you have a salad in addition to that. So we're changing the proportion. We're changing the how much, and as needed, and even in this case, changing it from white rice to brown rice instead. As we've told people who are in rice countries, that rice is the deal, and white rice is the deal. Sometimes it's hard for them to make that change from white rice to brown rice. We tell them, well, mix them. You have to cook the brown rice separately from the white rice because brown rice does take longer, but mix them together for a while and see and have a transition as you get used to the brown rice. And it brings me to another thought. As we change our diets, the bacteria, the friendly bacteria in our guts actually change. And they can start changing within a few days. That's why, though, it's good to have a transition stage. Some people don't do too well of making a drastic change within a day or two. And why? Well, those friendly guys and unfriendly guys down there in your gut have to catch up with this new idea that you're introducing to them. You got to give even those guys a few days, a couple weeks, a few weeks to make some adjustments, but they make adjustments relatively rapidly according to how you change your diet by increasing the fiber, increasing your variety of whole plant foods. They start to adjust down there as well. And by that, then it ends up helping the rest of your systems, your mind, your immune system, your heart function. All of these start to adjust as those guys start to adjust down there. So making it brown rice instead of white rice, having a big stir fry instead of just a few little bit of mixed vegetables, increasing our tofu instead of just a few small pieces. All right, another possibility is having like rice and potatoes in the same meal. You have rice and potatoes in the same meal, then we start to wonder, okay, are we having any beans even? Maybe we're having a couple vegetables, but are we even having any beans? We're getting two major starches in one meal. Now, if neither the potatoes or the rice are very big proportions, it might work. But if you're not used to adjusting your portions on your plate, you might end up with a plate like this or even more starchy stuff, as we love potatoes and we love rice. And, well, there's not much room left for much of anything else. So let's just be aware of not putting two items from the same category on our plate. We can, but we just have to be mindful they don't get out of proportion. Another possible not so good thing would be an oat burger sandwich with a large side of fries or potato chips. Is a sandwich bad? No, sandwich is not necessarily bad, but what have we just presented? Okay, the sandwich is going to be wheat. The oat burgers are oats, which is also grain. We might have a leaf of lettuce and a tomato in there, maybe, hopefully. And then we have maybe half of the plate of French fries or potato chips. Now we're talking about probably 3/4 of our plate are from the grain and starchy vegetable category. What would we do for something like that? Obviously, sandwiches are nice. They're quick meals, and I love a good sandwich. And I don't want to say that oat burgers are bad, but I put oat burgers here as just to drive home that this menu is like all from one category. But even within oat burgers and making oat burgers, you can put pecan meal in that, which introduces some of the nuts. And instead of fries and potato chips, what about coleslaw? What about baby carrots? What about some other salad that could be there? Corn on the cob is typically categorized as starchy, but it just doesn't seem to be quite as starchy as some of those other ones. So maybe that would work. But the point is bringing in other things so that the plate isn't basically one category of food or 3/4 of one category of food. What about a menu of macaroni and cheese with potato salad and cake? Like a good, what's with that? Well, it's all pretty much from the same category again. As much as we love macaroni and cheese and potato salad, that's kind of all from the same category again. And not to say we can't have it, but let's just try to keep things in their proportion. Instead of maybe potato salad, maybe we will have coleslaw and beans, okay? Cake is a whole nother discussion. The point was macaroni and cheese and potato salad, and the cake was just an additional injury to the whole menu. But I think you kind of get the idea that we can have a lousy vegan plate, or we can have a good vegan plate. A lot of it has to do with our planning of what we're choosing to eat. And the more that we can go with this proportion, the better we will have of our health. And for some of us, it may require some adjustments, and that's fine. That's all what about this year is about, what the Health and Temperance wants all of us to do. Improve. Choose something that you can improve. All of us have somewhere, some way, somehow we can improve. Whether it's your weight that you saw with the body composition machine, or you're going, well, it looks like I hardly eat any beans, and so I really need to replace some of my potatoes with some beans instead. And yes, we all have likes and dislikes, but we can learn to like things. That's one thing. We can learn to like things. And even that being said, there are probably things in each one of these categories that we like. I don't think I have to talk anything about this category of grains and starchy vegetables, because I think probably every one of us either like bread or rice or potatoes. Probably most of us like one of those things, so that's not a problem. The other categories like beans, certainly there's some beans that you like, or hummus, or nuts, or something that you like that you can make sure, or lentils works really good inside here. Raw vegetables, there are certainly some raw vegetables that you like. There are certainly some cooked vegetables you like. And while this is somewhat limiting, if you're only limiting to things you like, at least at the start, then as we increase our repertoire of things that we like, we increase the source of fiber Remember, all the different kinds of fruits and vegetables and legumes and things have slightly variations of fiber, and they all feed different friendly bacteria. And we want to keep those guys down there as happy as we can possibly keep them. Because when you get digestive issues, it's not fun. When you get leaky gut, that feeds right into a big factor in autoimmune diseases. Because now the body is starting to attack itself. Autoimmune diseases is another big one. Like cancer, it's not a walk in the park. It's not like coming down with your flu or COVID or a cold and you're going to get well in 2 or 3 weeks. Usually those things are, you're in for a long haul. You don't just... So you can take introspection and decide where you are and make choices and plans for improvement. I think at this time I'm going to stop there as we have already gone for an hour. And yeah, does anybody have questions or comments or anything? Yes, go ahead, Marge.